The college football playoff bracket was just officially announced, and I thought it would be interesting to predict the outcome of the college football playoff if it were college basketball and more specifically March Madness. So we are going to use the bracket put together by the college football playoff selection committee and predict what would happen if the matchups were between each program's college basketball team. But before we get into the video, if you enjoy the content, please consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel. And now let's jump into it. So first, let's take a look at the official college football playoff bracket and the 12 teams that will be playing for the national championship. And the first 4 teams will all receive a bye in the first round of the tournament. So we'll start with the number 1 team, which is the Indiana Hoosiers. Then at number 2 is the Ohio State Buckeyes. After that, we have the Georgia Bulldogs at number 3. And then we have the Texas Tech Red Raiders, who come in at number 4 and are the last team to get a bye in the first round of the bracket. Before our next 4 teams, they will get a home game, which is how the college football playoff does it, which is something to keep in mind for our predictions. So coming in at number 5 is the Oregon Ducks, and then we have the Ole Miss Rebels at number 6. The Texas A&M Aggies come in at number 7, and finally the Oklahoma Sooners are the number 8 seed. And then for our final 4 teams in the playoffs, we have the Alabama Crimson Tide at number 9, who will take on fellow SEC opponent Oklahoma in the 8-9 matchup in the first round. At number 10 is the Miami Hurricanes, who will go up against the Texas A&M Aggies. And then Tulane comes in at number 11 and will face Ole Miss. And lastly, James Madison is our final team, and they will take on Oregon in the first round. But let's go ahead and jump into our predictions of the college football playoff if it were March Madness, and we'll start with the first game of the playoff, which is the number 9 seeded Alabama Crimson Tide traveling to Norman to take on the number 8 seeded Oklahoma Sooners. And we'll actually get to see this exact matchup in college basketball later on this season, and I'll tell you right from the start, I'm picking Alabama. Even with 2 losses on the year so far, the Crimson Tide have looked like one of the best teams in college basketball to me and have some of the most impressive wins with the victories away from home against St. John's and Illinois. And Alabama is better at just about every position compared to Oklahoma, with my only hesitancy being at the 4 spot when comparing Tay Davis for the Sooners and Taylor Bowen for the Tide. And if we predicted this matchup before the college basketball season began, I still would have gone with Alabama, but Oklahoma has been disappointing to me so far this season, as I feel like their talent is better than their current record reflects. But at the end of the day, Alabama would have the best player on the floor in LeBaron Philon and the best offense, and I just don't think that Oklahoma would be able to keep up. Next, we have the 5-seeded Oregon Ducks taking on the Cinderella hopeful James Madison Dukes, who is at the 12 seed. And if this was 2024 and former Dukes coach Mark Byington was still there and they had Terrence Edwards from that squad, I would be picking the upset. But so far this season, James Madison has not performed well and hasn't been competitive in either of their Quad 1 games, so I don't think that this would be much of a test, even for a struggling Oregon team. And the Dukes have one of the worst defensive ratings in the country and would struggle with guys like Jackson Shelstad and Nate Biddle, so I have the Ducks moving on to the quarterfinals. And jumping to the other side of the bracket, we have Miami as the 10 seed going on the road to face 7-seeded Texas A&M, and what I would think would be the best matchup of the first round. A&M got off to a shaky 2-2 start in Bucky McMillan's first season with the Aggies, but has been solid ever since. And Miami also has a first-year coach of their own in Jay Lucas and has impressed me for the most part, with their only losses so far coming to top 10 teams in Florida and BYU. And in KenPom, these teams are within 6 rankings of each other, and when looking at their rosters, they're extremely similar in terms of talent level. And although I think Miami could have trouble with the brand of basketball that Texas A&M now plays under Bucky McMillan, where it's fast-paced with full court pressure and a lot of possessions, I'm still picking the Hurricanes to upset the Aggies and move on to the next round, because I don't think Texas A&M has an answer for a guy like Malik Reneau. Reneau is quietly having his best season of college yet, averaging 20 points and 6.5 rebounds while shooting nearly 40% from deep when stepping out there, and I just don't think that Texas A&M has the front court to contain him. And our last matchup of the first round is 6 seed Ole Miss against 11 seed Tulane, and if anyone in this bracket knows something about upsets, it would be Tulane head coach Ron Hunter, who is the head coach of the Georgia State Panthers back in 2015 when they upset the 3-seeded Baylor Bears in the first round of the NCAA tournament. And although it would be awesome if this were to happen again, I don't think it would, which is why I have the Ole Miss Rebels moving on to the quarterfinals. And I know the Rebels have struggled as of late, losing their last 4 games, but every game was competitive until the very end, and I still don't think Chris Beard's squad has reached their full potential. Now jumping into our quarterfinals, we'll start with Alabama versus Indiana, and this would definitely be my favorite matchup of the second round. Each team has a potential All-American in LeBaron Philon from Alabama and Tucker DeVries from Indiana, and each team has elite guard play, although I do prefer the Crimson Tides. But the biggest differentiator for me in this matchup matchup is the depth that Alabama brings and the pace that goes along with it. If you've watched an Alabama game, you know they are one of the fastest paced teams in all of college basketball, and I only think there are a select few defenses that can slow them down, and to me, Indiana isn't one of them. And that's not to say that Indiana doesn't have a good defense, because they actually do, and they rank in the top 25 nationally in adjusted defensive efficiency so far, but the depth that Alabama has, where all 5 guys are constantly playing at such a high pace, is where the problem lies. Indiana leans heavily on their starters and really only goes 7 or 8 deep, where Alabama can go 10 or 11 deep and possession after possession push the ball up the court, which leads me to advance Alabama to the semifinals. The next matchup is between the Texas Tech Red Raiders and the Oregon Ducks, and so far this season, both of these teams have disappointed, but to varying degrees. On one hand, you have the Red Raiders, who have 2 ranked losses but no signature wins yet, and then on the other hand, you have the Oregon Ducks, who came into the season receiving votes to be in the top 25 and have now lost their last 5 games and have a losing record on the season. But a main contributor to my pick for this game is the injury concerns with Nate Biddle. Biddle has already missed 2 games this year, and if he wasn't 100% for this matchup, then Texas Tech's preseason All-American JT Toppin would absolutely take over and dominate this game. And I also prefer the other pieces that Texas Tech has with Christian Anderson, Lawan Watts, and Donovan Atwell over Oregon's, so I'm going with the Red Raiders to advance to face Alabama in the next round. On the other side, we have Ohio State taking on Miami in what would be the closest matchup of this round. And similarly to Miami's matchup against Texas A&M in the first round, both the Hurricanes and the Buckeyes are close to each other when it comes to the analytics. But when it comes to March Madness and close matchups, the one thing I always look at is who has the better and more experienced guards, and in this case, it's the Ohio State Buckeyes. Senior point guard Bruce Thornton is a 4-year veteran in the Ohio State program and has continued to elevate his game each and every year, and so far this season, Thornton is averaging 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game on 60% from the field and over 50% from the three-point line, and the Buckeyes' second leading scorer is also in the backcourt in John Mobley Jr., and as a whole, I just think this Ohio State team would end up winning in the end, so I have them advancing to the next round. And the last game in the semifinals will be between Georgia and Ole Miss, which is another matchup we will see in the regular season in SEC play, and I would say that both of these teams have had surprising starts to the year and look to be heading in opposite directions. As I mentioned previously, Ole Miss has lost their last 4 games, while Georgia has just 1 loss this season and has surprisingly snuck into the top 25 of KenPom's rankings, which is way higher than I would have expected to see them this season. But the Bulldogs have some of the best depth in the entire country on their roster, with 11 guys averaging over 11 minutes, and they also are one of the faster paced teams in the country and are averaging 99.9 points per game so far this season. And when looking at how both Georgia and Ole Miss have been playing as of late, I'm not sure if the Rebels could keep up with the Bulldogs on offense, and especially in a 40-minute game as a whole, I have Georgia moving on. But in our first semifinal matchup, we have the 2 most talented teams in the field with Alabama and Texas Tech. And so far this season, the Crimson Tide and the Red Raiders have 2 common opponents in Purdue and Illinois, with Alabama going 1-1 and Texas Tech going 0-2 against the pair. And although I don't want this to be my only reason for picking the Crimson Tide in the matchup, it is something to consider, especially with the way each of these teams played against these ranked opponents. For both of these games, Alabama was in it from start to finish, and at times, it looked like they were going to go on and beat Purdue, but they at least showed they were competitive. But for Texas Tech, the Red Raiders were down 13 points at halftime to Illinois and clawed their way back in the second half and ended up only losing by 4 points, whereas in their matchup with Purdue, they got absolutely dominated, losing by 30 points on a neutral site. And besides results against common opponents, Alabama has more weapons on their roster than Texas Tech, and when it comes to late game situations, I would choose LeBaron Philon to have the ball in his hands, which ultimately leads me to pick Alabama to move on to the championship game. And on the other side, we have Ohio State versus Georgia, which would have the potential to be one of the highest scoring games in the tournament, with each team having a top 30 offense in the country. And I think this would be one of the more interesting guard matchups we had as well, with Blue Kane and Jeremiah Wilkinson for the Bulldogs going up against Bruce Thornton and John Mobley Jr. for the Buckeyes. And although I favor Ohio State in the backcourt, I think the frontcourt is what would ultimately decide this game, and I like the Buckeyes on that end as well. Santa Clara 7-footer Christoph Tilley has been a huge transfer addition for Ohio State, and Devin Royal and Brandon Noel have also been awesome to start the year, and I just don't think Georgia has the bigs to stack up against Ohio State's front line. So although the numbers and metrics are currently favoring Georgia, I'm going with Ohio State to get the win in this matchup and move on to face Alabama in the championship. So in the end, we have a matchup between Alabama and Ohio State for the national title, and I actually think this game would be closer than expected. As we all know, Alabama is one of the fastest paced teams in the country, which leads to a lot of their shots coming from beyond the arc, but Ohio State is actually top 15 in the nation when it comes to defending the three-point line. And on the other end, Alabama isn't the best at defending the interior, which is how they got beat by both Purdue and Gonzaga, and Ohio State has the highest two-point field goal percentage in the nation. So when combining those two factors and looking at how they've played so far, I think this would be a really close game, but the biggest thing I would look at is the matchup between LeBaron Philon and Bruce Thornton, as these are two of the best point guards in the entire country, and in the end, I have to go with LeBaron Philon, Nate Oates, and the Crimson Tide, as they have shown they are not scared of the moment and are one of the best teams in all of college basketball in my opinion. So after it's all said and done, I have the Alabama Crimson Tide winning the college football playoff if it were March Madness. But that wraps it up for today's video. Let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are on my predictions and what would you have done differently in your bracket. Also, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.